Namaste. I am Professor Balaganapati Devarakonda, presently teaching philosophy at University of Delhi. In this module, we would be dealing with problems of theory of knowledge. Specifically, we would be limiting ourselves to Indian philosophical systems. Within that, we would be addressing the problems that are involved in the epistemology that Nyaya philosophical system in India discusses. In the first stage, it is important to point out the peculiarities of Indian conception of knowledge which are relevant on the background of Western epistemology. There are difficulties in identifying the concept of knowledge or its exact analog in Indian epistemological literature. The word jnana is used in many Indian languages as the equivalent of English word knowledge. About the usage of the English word knowledge, we can say that there is nothing such as true knowledge and false knowledge, or valid knowledge or invalid knowledge. Any piece of knowledge by its very essence must be true. If a piece of knowledge is not true, then it is not untrue knowledge. It is simply not knowledge at all. But in Sanskrit epistemological literature, particularly in the epistemological systems such as Nyaya Vaiseshika, Purvamimamsa, Buddhism and Jainism, the word jnana is used in value neutral sense. That is, it is not necessary that jnana by its very essence must be true. As a result, the distinction between yadhartha jnana and ayadhartha jnana or samyak jnana and mithya jnana is a genuine distinction. The scholars who are not clear on this distinction between jnana and knowledge translate this classification of jnana as the one between valid knowledge and invalid knowledge, or true knowledge and false knowledge, or right knowledge and wrong knowledge. Even a scholar like J.N. Mohanty, in his Gangesa's Theory of Truth, was tempted to translate prama and aprama as true knowledge and false knowledge respectively. Of course, the verb jna, janati, is used in common parlance in Sanskrit in the sense to know. Similarly, Advaita Vedanta of Shankara, the word jnana is used in the sense of a true cognition, that is, cognition governed by a real object, vastu tantra, and not the cognition governed by a subjective attitude. In the present course, however, we will not follow this value loaded usage of the word jnana. We will follow its value neutral usage. In English, the word cognition is used in such a value neutral sense that there can be true cognition as well as false cognition. Hence, for our course, I prefer to translate the word jnana as cognition. Like the word jnana, its synonyms like buddhi and upalabdhi are used in Nyaya and Buddhist Purvamimamsa traditions in truth value neutral sense, so that an instance of jnana, buddhi, upalabdhi is not true by definition, but it can be either true or false depending upon other conditions. In English, knowledge is supposed to stand for true belief or justified true belief. This leads us to the second difficulty in identifying the exact analog of knowledge in Indian tradition. The words such as knowledge or belief are used in the Western tradition in dispositional sense. The Indian epistemological theories, on the other hand, talk primarily about cognitive episodes as being acceptable or otherwise, and not about knowledge or belief as dispositions. The gravity of the issue was realized by a scholar like B.K. Matilal when he took the point made by Gilbert Ryle seriously, that the verbs believe and know do not refer to acts or episodes but to dispositions. To be more precise, believe is a tendency verb and know is a capacity verb. On the other hand, the verb jna in a sentence like Ghatam aham janami refers to the act of becoming aware of a part or to an episode of cognizing a part and not to the dispositional knowledge of a part. Since the concept of jnana in its episodic form is foundational to the whole of Indian epistemology, one has to be careful in reading Western epistemological issues in the literature of Indian epistemology and vice versa. Hence, following Matilal, we will use the words cognition and knowledge in episodic sense for the words jnana and prama of Indian epistemology. One of the aspects of this difference between the two approaches to knowledge is that in Indian tradition, JTB, justified true belief definition of knowledge, knowledge as justified true belief is not available. What can be available at the most is JTC, definition according to which prama is a justified true cognition. It can be argued that generally what we have is true cognition definition and not even justified true cognition definition. That is, prama or pramana is justified as a true cognition, samyak jnanam, or true representative cognition, yathartha anubhava. Though the two conceptions of knowledge are radically different in this way, I do not mean to say that there is incommensurability between the two epistemological traditions, that Indian tradition cannot talk about knowledge in dispositional sense, or that Western tradition cannot talk about knowledge in episodic sense. As Matilal has pointed out, the Nyaya analog of Western conception of knowledge is not jnana or prama, but samskara. Samskara is the impression generated by an episodic cognition on mind, that is self or Atman, by awakening which memory cognition becomes possible. On the other hand, though knowledge may not be called an event in English, coming to know, for example, can be treated as an event. Also, there are Western philosophers like P.T. Geach who talk about mental acts in general and acts of judgment in particular, which Matilal points out. The third difficulty is about the relation between a cognition and a proposition. In the Western epistemology, knowledge in the sense of knowledge that is propositional. The JTB, justified true belief definition of knowledge too, refers to a belief which is necessarily expressible in the form of a proposition. In Indian epistemology, when knowledge is defined as a true cognition, a cognition is not necessarily expressible in the form of a proposition. This can give rise to the problem of judging a piece of cognition to be true or false. According to the correspondence theory of truth value of a piece of cognition or a belief can be judged by comparing the elements and the structure of the cognition or belief with those of the facts. The structure of the cognition or belief can be understood when the cognition or belief is expressed in language. For example, subject and predicate refer to property bearers and properties in the reality. Relational form refers to the relations and the corresponding relata in reality. The Nyaya Vaiseshika system accepts this model in its analysis of knowledge. Though cognitions themselves are not propositional in nature, they can generally be expressed through propositions, and the structure of those propositions can be compared with structure of the reality, on the basis of which the cognitions can be judged to be true or false. But there are systems of Indian philosophy which do not accept this potentially linguistic structure of knowledge. Hence, they have to take a different stand on the question of truth and falsehood of cognitions. Systems such as Advaita Vedanta talk of objectless cognition, about which the question of truth or falsehood does not arise, and even such a cognition is sometimes called ultimate pramana, parama pramana, which stands for the knowledge of ultimate reality. Buddhists and Nyayikas distinguish between non-judgmental and judgmental cognition, that is nirvikalpaka and savikalpaka jnana. For Buddhists, non-judgmental cognition is pramana of a highest order, though it is non-propositional. The non-judgmental cognition can be called true or samyak according to the realist Buddhists, particularly Sautrantikas, because the cognition is caused by the object and its cognition assumes the form of the object. Under the influence of Buddhism, Nayayikas also had to accept non-judgmental perception, but they conceived it differently. According to them, non-judgmental perception just provides the raw material for a judgmental perception. In itself, it is neither true nor false. In this way, we have to be a bit cautious while discussing Indian theories of knowledge. We have to keep in mind that it has its own specificities which are not always analogous to the Western theories of knowledge. In these two lectures, we will be introduced to the theories of knowledge developed by four philosophical schools or darshanas, as they are generally called: Nyaya, which represents the orthodox or Vedic side, and three heterodox schools, namely Buddhism, Jainism and Charvaka, also called Lokayata. Indian philosophy has developed through darshanas, which are popularly called schools or systems of Indian philosophy. These schools have been grouped or classified in various ways. One of the socially significant ways of classifying the schools of Indian philosophy is into orthodox and heterodox. Orthodox schools are those which believe in the authenticity of the Vedas. Heterodox schools are those which do not believe in it. Belief in the authenticity of Vedas represents a worldview and a view of life which promotes the system of rituals such as sacrifices, including animal sacrifice, and a static social order of varna and caste consisting of the hierarchy based on birth. The schools which did not believe in the Vedas opposed the ritualism of sacrifices and also the hierarchical social order. Different heterodox systems did this in different ways. Vedic ritualism was criticized from within the Vedic tradition as well, which we find reflected in Upanishadic literature, which developed later into Vedanta philosophy. Hence, initially we have different worldviews and views of life interacting, sometimes cooperating, sometimes conflicting with each other. When these interactions grew, each tradition felt the need for methodological tools for defending and justifying their own views against the attacks of others, and also for criticizing other views. In other words, every tradition needed a system of pramanas, means of knowledge or justification. By the 1st century BC, there was a theory of debate which also dealt with correct and incorrect application of pramanas. We find it in the medical treatise called Charaka Samhita. This theory was the early stage of what later on developed as Nyaya Darshana. The Nyaya Darshana had its view of the world also, which it borrowed from another theory called Vaiseshika. This further gave rise to a joint system called Nyaya Vaiseshika. Hence, Nyaya epistemology can be regarded as the forerunner of all epistemologies in Indian philosophy. Other philosophical traditions, for developing their own epistemologies, either borrowed them from Nyaya or developed them as alternative to Nyaya or modifications of Nyaya. Of course, this relation between Nyaya and other systems was not unilateral, just as the epistemologies of other systems were influenced or affected by Nyaya. The Nayayikas had to develop or modify their epistemological views in the light of the views of other systems. We are not going to discuss this latter aspect in this course. In this lecture, we will understand in brief Nyaya concept and classification of pramana, and in the second lecture, we will be introduced to the epistemology of heterodox schools. Nyaya conception of knowledge. In Sanskrit, the word pramana, which is derived from the word pra plus ma, has two meanings. One, correct cognition, that is knowledge. Two, means to correct cognition, that is means to knowledge. In early Nyaya literature, we find the word pramana used in both ways. For instance, sometimes veridical perception is called pratyaksha pramana, sometimes a non-defective sense organ which is a means to veridical perception is regarded as pratyaksha pramana. But with the development of their epistemology, Nayayikas distinguished more sharply between what they call prama, that is knowledge, and pramana, that is means to knowledge. They rather defined pramana as a means to prama, prama karanam pramanam. In order to understand the Nyaya conception of knowledge, that is prama, one has to distinguish between presentative cognition, which is anubhava, recollection, which is smriti. This distinction was important for Nayayikas because they, like the philosophers of many other schools, did not want to give the status of knowledge to memory. Indian epistemologists generally held that one can claim to be knowing something only when one is cognizing it afresh or anew. If one is remembering which one has already known before, then one cannot be said to be knowing it at that time. While discussing knowledge, Nayayikas were concerned with presentative cognition. Hence, they defined prama as true representative cognition, yadartha anubhava prama. Yadartha means true. Literally, yadartha means in accordance with the object. Here, Nayayikas are accepting correspondence theory of truth. Though a memory cognition can also be called true or false, the way a memory can be true is different from the way presentative cognition can be true. This is one of the reasons why memory is not regarded as a form of knowledge. Suppose there is a conch shell before me, but because of its glittering appearance, I have an illusion that it is a piece of silver. This illusory cognition is a presentative cognition, but will not be called knowledge because it is false cognition. Now, suppose after 1 hour I report to my friend that 1 hour before I saw a piece of silver. This is a report based on my memory cognition. This memory cognition will be treated as true memory because it is according to the cognition I had before, though not according to the object. One more point relevant for the Nyaya conception of truth is that when Nayayikas talk of truth or falsehood of a cognition, they have a proposition like structure of cognition as well as of reality in mind. Though they do not officially grant that cognition itself has a form or a structure, the object of cognition has a structure. If the structure of the object of cognition tallies with the structure of the reality, the cognition is said to be true, otherwise false. Broadly speaking, the structure of the object and also of the reality can be expressed in terms of property and property bearer, dharma, dharmin, or qualification and qualified, visheshana and visheshya. Our cognitions are of the form A is so and so, which means A is qualified by being so and so. For example, I may perceive a glass and have the cognition of the form this is a glass, which means that this thing is qualified by glassness. This is a true cognition because this structure of the object of cognition tallies with the fact that the thing before me possesses the universal property, namely glassness. In the case of erroneous perception, the observer sees a property in a thing which is not there in the thing. One sees silver in the place of a conch shell, one has the cognition of the form, this is silver, when the fact is that the thing before the observer is not silver. When the person goes near and observes keenly, the error will be removed. The person then will have perception of the form, this is conch shell. The property bearer, this is common in both. The error was in the property and it is removed. But the property called silverness, which the observer saw, that is not totally absent from the world, nor is it observer's mental creation. Only the observer saw it in a wrong place or in a wrong way. Hence, according to Nyaya, an erroneous perception is a cause of seeing a thing otherwise. anyatha khyati. In this sense, the Nyaya theory of perceptual error is called anyatha khyati theory of error. Given the nature of knowledge as true presentative cognition, the next question is, how many ways are there of knowing the things as they are? This is the question about the number of pramanas. Different schools of Indian philosophy accept different schemes of pramanas. The major schools and the schemes accepted by them can be shown in tabular form as follows. Acceptance of a particular set of pramanas could be due to many reasons. It could be either because it is given in the tradition of the school, or because it is required by the particular worldview or the view of life advocated by the school, or it could be accepted purely on logical grounds. However, each school tries to establish that all the pramanas accepted by it are necessary. None of them can be dispensed with. It also tries to establish that the additional pramanas accepted by other schools are either not means to knowledge at all, or if they are reducible to the pramanas accepted by it. Nyaya classification of pramanas. In what follows, we will briefly discuss the fourfold classification of pramanas accepted by Nyaya: perception, pratyaksha, inference, which is called as anumana, analogy, which is called as upamana, and verbal testimony, which is shabda.